We are stepping into the high-stakes, high-pressure world of top-tier management consulting. Our goal in this explainer, to uncover the single hidden skill that separates generic slide builders from true strategic advisors. We aren't just talking about making prettier charts here. No, we're talking about a cognitive weapon that fundamentally changes how you solve complex business problems. Let's dive in. Okay, I want you to picture a very specific, almost cinematic scene. It's midnight, you're in a tense, glass-walled corporate boardroom. An exhausted junior consultant is endlessly polishing a massive 60-page benchmarking deck. You know the drill. Aligning boxes, checking font sizes, making absolutely sure the colors match the brand guidelines perfectly. And then a senior partner walks in, glances at the screen, and totally shatters the illusion with one simple question. What decision does the client actually need to make after reading this deck? And just like that, the junior consultant freezes because, well, they don't know. They were so busy building slides, they completely forgot to figure out the actual point of the project.
Section 1. The wrong question. To understand why so many consulting decks fail spectacularly, we really need to investigate the scene of the crime.
And that crime almost always happens right at the very beginning, during the initial client brief. There's this stark contrast between the stated question and the hidden question. The stated question is what the client literally asked, like, how digitally mature are we? If you take that at face value, you're trapped. You're going to end up building a generic benchmarking deck just comparing their IT spend to their competitors. But as the McKinsey Mind approach teaches us, a stated question is usually just a symptom. You have to hunt for the hidden question. The client doesn't actually care about digital maturity for the sake of it, right? The real tension, the hidden question is, are our massive investments in digital tools actually improving our operational performance? Listen, if you answer the stated question, you're just a vendor. But if you uncover and answer that hidden question, that makes you a trusted advisor. Section 2, finding the real problem. Because before a single slide is built, you have to diagnose that real tension. To do this, we're bringing in Barbara Minto's legendary SCQA framework. Now, a lot of people think of SCQA, situation, complication, question, answer, as just a neat little format for writing an introduction. But the best consultants, they don't use it as a writing format. They treat it as a cognitive weapon to unearth that hidden question our junior consultant completely missed. First, you establish the undisputed situation. Then, you pinpoint the complication. That's the trigger that disrupted the situation. And only then does the exact right question naturally emerge, which of course you'll provide the answer to. Minto shows us that every business problem is triggered by a disruption to the status quo. That's your complication. For example, say you have a task but something's blocking it. Well, the question naturally becomes, what should we do? Or maybe you know the solution but you're facing resistance. Then the question is, how do we implement it? By linking the established, agreed-upon situation with that disruptive complication, you literally force the exact right question to the surface. It completely stops you from solving a problem the client doesn't actually have. So how do you actually apply this with your teams? You use the question diagnosis canvas. Think of this as a toll gate. You literally cannot let your analysts start researching until they can definitively answer 4 things. 1, what decision must the client make? 2, what tension created this project in the first place? 3, what answer will actually change their course of action? And 4, what specific evidence would prove or disprove that answer? Using this canvas manages client expectations right from day 1, so you have absolute alignment on what success actually looks like. Section 3, structuring a logical hypothesis. Because once you diagnose the right question, you can't just go off and do random research. The McKinsey approach actually dictates a pretty bold move here. You solve the problem at the very first meeting by forming a hypothesis. You take your initial unproven answer to the SCQA, and that becomes your main thought. You place that thought at the very top of your structure, and then you break it down into sub-issues that are MECE. Now, if you're not familiar, MECE is basically a holy word in consulting. It stands for mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive. In plain English, it means your sub-issues don't overlap, and together they cover every possible angle of the whole problem. Mental logic is brilliant because it visually structures complex analytical findings so that every single data point aggressively defends that singular governing thought at the top. You aren't taking the client on some meandering mystery journey of your research. Instead, you start with the answer, the key line, and immediately back it up with grouped logical summaries. To prove that top-level hypothesis, we build our MECE issue tree. A classic example is breaking down profit for, say, Acme widgets. If the top hypothesis is profits are down, your first MECE breakdown is simply revenue and expenses. There's no overlap, and there's absolutely no missing third category. From there, you break revenue down further into things like widget sales, leasing, and service. Doing this isolates exactly where the problem lives, which means your team's research effort is incredibly targeted.
Section 4. Designing validated analysis. Now that we have our issue tree beautifully built, we have to avoid the ultimate consulting trap.
And that trap is what we call boiling the ocean. Boiling the ocean means trying to analyze every single piece of data in the company just to see what turns up. It's a nightmare. Instead, the McKinsey Mind approach relies on a rigorous, iterative loop. You start with a hypothesis, then you explicitly design the analysis needed to test it. Only then do you actually do the research. And finally, interpretation, which, by the way, might force you to tweak your hypothesis and loop right back around. This methodology guarantees you are only gathering reliable data that directly supports the final decision.
This matrix is basically your secret weapon for team discipline. Before anyone on your team requests a massive data dump from the client, they have to list the sub-hypothesis, identify the precise data point needed, name the source, and state exactly what outcome will prove or disprove their argument. Listen, if a data point doesn't explicitly validate a branch of your MECE tree, you do not pull it, period. Doing this literally saves thousands of hours of wasted spreadsheet work.
Section 5. Leading teams and clients. Because finding the right answer with beautifully validated data, that's really only half the battle. The other half is navigating the delicate politics of complex client organizations. And this brings us to a really powerful, often overlooked McKinsey tactic: cover from behind. You never, ever want to surprise a CEO with bad news in a final presentation. That is a disaster waiting to happen. Instead, you take your initial analysis to the mid-level manager who actually provided the data. You let them interpret it with you first. By involving the client directly in the interpretation phase, the final recommendation doesn't feel like something imposed on them. It feels like an insight they helped discover. Section 6. The before and after. Let's see what happens when our exhausted junior consultant from the midnight boardroom actually applies this structured investigation. The transformation is incredible, and honestly, it's what clients pay millions of dollars for. A generic benchmarking deck just lists passive facts. It dumps data and leaves the client to figure out what on earth to do with it. But a hypothesis-driven deck built purely on the pyramid principle, it tells a compelling narrative. It actively proves that specific digital tools lower operational expenses, which practically forces a corporate decision on exactly where to invest next. You're moving the client from passive reading to active, confident decision-making. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final thought. Before you open your next blank presentation or ask for your next massive data set, I want you to stop and ask yourself, are you answering the question your client asked or the question they actually need answered? Finding that hidden question changes absolutely everything. Stay relentlessly focused on the core problem, and I promise you, you will never build a useless slide deck again.